Before the bombs fell, long before the wasteland hardened into silence and broken highways, there was a man who believed he could outthink history. Robert Edwin House lived his life surrounded by data, prediction models, and possibilities that seemed invisible to everyone else. He saw the world not as it was, but as it was heading, a slow march toward resource collapse, tension, nuclear brinkmanship. Where others dismissed the warnings, he built his life around preparing for the moment no one truly believed would come. House was not born into power the way dynasties are. He built it. His company, Robco, became one of the defining technological giants of the pre-war United States. Terminals, robots, automated systems, countless machines that quietly worked behind the scenes were stamped with his fingerprints. He had no interest in politics, not really. He preferred control through infrastructure, systems people would depend on without ever thinking deeply about the man responsible for them. Las Vegas became his obsession. It was a city built on illusion, but beneath its casinos and neon glow, House saw strategic perfection, open desert, minimal military value, far from primary strike targets. He didn't see glamour, he saw survivability, and slowly, methodically, he began weaving his protection around it. Undisclosed defense contracts, hidden anti-missile systems, algorithms designed to intercept trajectories in moments where human bureaucracies would freeze. When the world finally burned, his preparations didn't save everything. They never could, but they saved enough. Where most cities became glass and ash, New Vegas remained wounded rather than erased. Buildings cracked, streets fractured. Life fell quiet, but it did not disappear. House's plan had not been perfect, yet it had been enough to hold on to something resembling potential. To survive the war himself, he chose something far colder than a bunker or a vault. He entrusted his body to machines, suspended, preserved, supported by layers of software and life extension technology that turned existence into something mechanical and fragile. He traded human touch, sunlight, and normal time for a chance to wake when the flames were gone. For him, survival wasn't about safety, it was about continuity, staying present long enough to rebuild what others had ruined. Centuries passed around him without sound. Outside, tribes formed, fell, merged, and reformed. Roads faded. Animals reclaimed forgotten spaces. Vaults opened. House slept through all of it, kept alive by systems that required constant precision. When he finally awoke fully again, he was no longer truly a man in the ordinary sense. His body was frail and barely sustained, while his mind existed threaded through the computers that preserved him, human, and something beyond, at the same time. He saw New Vegas as a project unfinished, still holding the shape he believed it deserved. Order instead of chaos, prosperity instead of wandering survival. His philosophy didn't soften with age, it sharpened. He had no deep interest in ruling people emotionally. He believed that if systems worked, stability followed. Casinos reopened not because he craved wealth, but because he believed structure would hold civilization upright again. The Securitrons roaming the strip became his voice and his hands, smiling yet unyielding. They delivered rules politely. They enforced calmly. They represented a world where everything functioned predictably, without the strange randomness the wasteland had grown used to. Some saw safety in that, others saw chains. House didn't bother arguing morally. He measured outcomes, not feelings. His disdain for the NCR and Caesar's Legion grew from the same thread. The NCR, to him, represented bureaucracy masquerading as progress, too slow, too corrupt, too clumsy to survive the harshness ahead. The Legion, meanwhile, looked like history regressing backward, cruelty disguising itself as discipline. Both forces wanted New Vegas, and he knew that if either took it, the city would lose the role he'd preserved it for. Underneath his decisions was something interesting. He did not truly believe he was tyrannical. He believed himself necessary. The wasteland, in his view, was a math problem, one that required precision instead of empathy. In a sense, he did not crave power for ego, he craved control because he believed the alternative was collapse. Yet, there is loneliness in immortality. In the sterile chamber where he existed, wires connected to skin, monitors whispering numbers quietly, he had no friends, no rivals he could stand face to face with. Every interaction filtered through speaker systems and robotic expressions. Somewhere behind his calculations and projections was a man who had removed himself from humanity in order to save it. Players who meet Mr. House in Fallout New Vegas sense that mixture, confidence bordering on arrogance, alongside something haunted. He doesn't beg. He doesn't threaten unnecessarily. He explains. He believes the reasoning should be enough, and if it isn't, he adjusts. What makes him unsettling is not cruelty, but certainty. He is calm about his vision, the way the desert sky is calm, large, unmovable, prepared to outlast everyone else. Whether one finds him inspiring or frightening depends on how one feels about a world where order arrives without asking how anyone feels about it. New Vegas glows at night because of him. Power grids hum, casinos laugh. People live there who would not survive beyond its borders. Some owe their safety to him without ever knowing his name. Others curse him while benefiting from the structure he put in place. In that sense, his presence becomes almost myth-like, neither savior nor villain, simply a force. And through all of it, beneath the strip, in that quiet life support chamber, Robert House remains awake, watching statistics, predictions, and faintly flickering dream fragments of the world he refuses to let fully die. A man who tried to control the future and ended up living outside of time. When people talk about Robert House, they often begin with the strip because that is where his presence feels most visible. Neon signs repaired long after the rest of the world dimmed, machines spinning and dealing cards, orderly patrols instead of roving gangs. But the foundations of his vision stretch back to his youth, long before the bombs ever fell. House believed early on that chaos was not natural. It was the result of failure in planning. If someone could predict systems accurately enough, almost anything could be prevented. This belief shaped every step of his rise through industry. Robco's success wasn't just the product of clever engineering. It was built on aggressive acquisition, ruthless business negotiation, and technological foresight bordering on obsession. House had little patience for inefficiency or short-term thinking. Where others focused on quarterly profits, he thought in decades, sometimes even centuries. His competitors saw him as cold. In truth, he was simply looking at a timeline they were unable or unwilling to imagine. Through Robco, he infiltrated homes, factories, vaults, military bases, all indirectly. His machines recorded data. They automated tasks. They replaced human error with artificial precision. Even before the war, he was already building a world where reliance on human institutions diminished. In many ways, his later transformation into a near-immortal overseer was simply the final step of an ideology that had begun much earlier. Human beings break, systems endure. When House realized nuclear war was inevitable, he did not attempt to stop it. That detail is important. He concluded the trajectory was already set, so instead of arguing with governments, campaigning, or trying to reform the world. He focused entirely on preserving what he could. To him, the old world was not worth saving wholesale, but certain pieces, technology, infrastructure, knowledge, those deserved protection. The preservation of Las Vegas was part strategy, part symbol. It represented commerce, exchange, entertainment, and resilience. It was the kind of city that could thrive independently if guided correctly. House's automated defense network was designed with chilling precision, enough to save the city, not enough to spark retaliation that would obliterate it completely. And when missiles slipped past his defenses, causing damage but not annihilation, he accepted the result the way a chess player accepts a compromised position. The game continued, just under harsher conditions. His suspended animation chamber became both coffin and throne, connected to sensors, preservation fluids, and fragile life support systems. His body remained frozen in a biological stasis so delicate that any disruption could mean instant death. Meanwhile, his consciousness stretched outward through data, calculations, probability models, and artificial proxies that acted as his voice. When he awoke into the wasteland, the world must have felt both smaller and larger at once. Smaller because civilization had collapsed into fragments. Larger because he now saw sweeping opportunity where others saw ruin. He began rebuilding not through speeches or armies, but by shaping systems again, this time using securitrons, contracts, and carefully controlled trade. He approached the tribes that had claimed the ruins of Vegas not as enemies, but as raw material. He united some through diplomacy, elevated others through technology, and removed those who could not be controlled. Not out of malice, just because disorder, to him, was inefficiency, and inefficiency could not exist in the future he envisioned. What makes House so compelling is that he genuinely believes his plan benefits humanity. He envisions New Vegas not as a dictatorship, but as a guided civilization shepherded by someone too logical to be corrupted the way politics always seems to be. People would live, work, gamble, trade, thrive. He would remain unseen, ensuring the system never collapses. Yet beneath that logical exterior lies tragedy. House gave up his humanity long before the end of the world, not through mutation, not through cruelty, but through calculation. He preserved his mind at the cost of touch, conversation, vulnerability, and companionship. His world became screens and probabilities. To visitors who meet him, there is a haunting quality to that sterile chamber deep below the strip. Machines breathe for him. The walls hum softly. A voice emerges from speakers with absolute composure. You sense intelligence, authority, and isolation layered together. You're not just talking to a ruler, you're speaking to someone who removed himself from reality, convinced that doing so made him more reliable. House's greatest enemy was never the NCR or the Legion. His greatest enemy was entropy, the creeping disorder that he believed would consume civilization if left to ordinary leadership. His battle wasn't fought with armies, it was fought with planning documents, automated systems, and centuries of patience. And yet, no matter how advanced his predictions were, he still relied on others to carry out his will. Couriers, casino bosses, uneasy allies, even a man convinced he had designed the perfect system still needed unpredictable human pieces to make it work. And that subtle irony lingers, like dust floating in light. Some say he is selfish. Others argue he is the only one thinking long term. The truth, as with most powerful figures in Fallout, lies somewhere between. He is deeply human in his desire to preserve, and deeply inhuman in how far he is willing to go to achieve it. Night after night, the lights of New Vegas continue to burn while ruins elsewhere fade into darkness. That is House's legacy, whether celebrated or feared. A city held together not by luck or faith, but by a single mind that refuses to let go. And beneath it all, Robert House watches quietly, suspended in machines, preserved by his own genius, and endlessly waiting for the world to finally align with the plan he created long before anyone else understood how fragile civilization truly was. Of all the choices Robert House made after the Great War, few were as deliberate or as revealing as the way he handled the families who came to rule the Strip. When he first emerged into the broken quiet of the post-war city, the ruins of Las Vegas had become home to scattered tribes, each with their own customs, violence, and uncertainty. Many leaders would have swept them aside. House did not. He watched them. He studied who could adapt, who could follow rules, and who could be shaped into something useful. He chose 3 groups and transformed them, not through kindness, but through structure. The chairman, the omertas, and the White Glove Society did not become what they are by accident. House gave them casinos. He gave them territory, image, purpose, and constraints. Each family received power, with strings woven deeply into it. They could profit, they could run their establishments, but they answered to him whether they fully realized it or not. In his mind, he wasn't creating mob bosses, he was creating pillars, controlled, motivated factions whose ambition could be harnessed instead of feared. He allowed them enough autonomy to feel important, yet not enough to destabilize the Strip. That balance is something he maintained with remarkable discipline. When a family drifted too far from his expectations, he didn't rage. He recalculated. He replaced leaders. He applied quiet pressure. His goal was never dominance for its own sake. It was function. If a part failed, it was corrected, not punished dramatically. To him, the Strip was an interconnected system, and every actor was just another component. This approach revealed something significant about his worldview. House did not think people were inherently bad or good. He thought they were unreliable when left unmanaged. So he built frameworks around them: contracts, surveillance, automated enforcement. And he believed that within those constraints, people could actually live better, safer, more prosperous lives than they ever would under chaotic freedom. To many listeners, that idea is both calming and unsettling, stability that costs something invisible. When powerful outsiders eventually turned their attention toward New Vegas, House saw the long game more clearly than any of them. The new California Republic brought soldiers, legislation, and the promise of democracy, along with corruption, stretched logistics, and an appetite for expansion that reminded him of pre-war mistakes. Caesar's legion arrived as brutal order wrapped in historical imitation, obsessed with control through fear rather than through design. To House, both were relics of thinking that had already proven itself flawed. They were attempts to rebuild the old world instead of evolving beyond it. In conversations with the Courier, he never hides his belief that humanity's future belongs not to nations or tribes, but to directed, efficient civilization guided by intelligent oversight. He imagines colonization beyond Earth, revival of lost technologies, and a long arc of progress that outlives individuals entirely. In his mind, he is not simply saving New Vegas. He is creating the launching point for humanity's next era, an era that requires someone who is willing to think beyond lifetimes, elections, and emotions. Yet, for all his foresight, his plan carries a quiet fragility. His life support chamber is delicate. His network of machines requires maintenance. A single breach could end everything he worked toward. That tension, absolute confidence paired with physical vulnerability, gives his presence a strangely human weight. He is brilliant, capable, and still deeply limited by the very technology he depends on. Those who follow his path see a world where order triumphs, where the Strip becomes a beacon of stability in a landscape guided mostly by scavenging and chance. They see a future shaped by someone who believes civilization must be engineered, not merely discovered. But those who oppose him argue that his vision removes something essential: the ability for people to shape their own destiny, even if imperfectly. They see a ruler who trusts systems more than souls. What makes Mr. House compelling for listeners drifting towards sleep is that there is no simple answer. He is not a monster, and he is not a savior. He is a man who made a choice, that certainty was worth more than freedom, and that a controlled civilization was better than a collapsing one. Whether he is right depends entirely on what one values most: security or possibility. And so, night after night, the lights of New Vegas burn against the darkness. They are steady, almost serene. They glow because one man refused to let them fade, long after his own heartbeat needed machines to continue. Beneath the Strip, he remains, watchful, analytical, distant, guiding a city that never truly sleeps. Even in a world that often feels like it has already ended, of all the questions surrounding Robert House, the ones that linger longest are about what he ultimately wanted and whether he ever truly planned to step aside. He spoke often about humanity's future, about great technological rebirth and long-term prosperity, but he rarely said much about his own place within that imagined world. In the quiet beneath the Strip, connected to wires and machines, he existed in a form of suspended rulership that could theoretically last centuries. To him, continuity mattered more than legacy. Leadership was not a story to end, it was a process to maintain. In that sense, House did not view his authority as temporary stewardship. He saw it as ongoing oversight. He believed stability required a single, uninterrupted mind guiding it, one that could absorb immense amounts of data, avoid emotional impulses, and correct problems before they spiraled into disaster. He did not aspire to create a successor. He aspired to remove the need for one entirely. Where ancient kings dreamed of heirs, House dreamed of permanence, governance without transition, without coups, without elections, without the chaos those things inevitably bring. Yet the world he managed remained stubbornly human. People on the Strip gambled, argued, loved, schemed, and dreamed. They built new lives that did not fit neatly into his predictive models. Employees had loyalties, leaders had ambitions, strangers wandered in and changed outcomes he could not perfectly anticipate. Even the courier, whose presence would shape the fate of New Vegas, was a variable his simulations could never fully domesticate. For all his calculations, reality remained textured, unpredictable, living. House's relationship with independence reflects this tension. He admired competence. He respected people who could understand long-term consequences, but he distrusted crowds, committees, and movements. Groups, in his experience, diluted intelligence. They made decisions based on compromise, emotion, or nostalgia. To House, the wasteland needed direction, a singular vision that refused to bend when pressured. He did not believe freedom vanished under such a system. He believed freedom existed within the boundaries of order, not outside them. Still, there are moments in his story that feel almost lonely. His words are confident, but his world is very small. His conversations echo in a sterile chamber. The closest thing he has to companionship comes from people who serve roles in his plan, not genuine relationships. There are no equals at his side, no friends who know him as anything other than a strategist preserved by machines. His life became a project, and eventually it was the only thing left of him. When listeners drift through his story, there's a quiet sadness beneath the brilliance. He saved New Vegas because he could. He rebuilt parts of civilization because he believed no one else would. But in doing so, he removed himself from everything ordinary about being human. He cannot feel the desert heat, the soft music drifting through casino doors at night, or the subtle relief of sitting among others and simply existing. All sensory experiences are filtered, mediated, distant. He is surrounded by data, but starved of presence, and yet he never expresses regret. Not openly. If anything, he views sacrifice as proof of commitment. In his mind, greatness requires loss, and he has already given up more than anyone he governs. This certainty is what makes him so compelling, a figure who believes he has outgrown the limitations of human emotion while still clearly embodying them in quieter, unspoken ways. Every possible ending to his story reflects a different answer to a simple question. Should one person decide the fate of a city forever? If he continues, New Vegas becomes clean, structured, and forward-focused, guided by a mind that will never age, never panic, and never drift. If he is stopped, the city falls back into the messy, uncertain flow of history, vulnerable, free, fragile, and alive in ways he would never allow. Neither path is presented as purely right or wrong. Fallout leaves that tension unresolved on purpose. House's vision is cold but efficient. His opponents are passionate but flawed. The strip itself becomes a reflection of that conflict, glittering order surrounded by sprawling unpredictability. Late at night, when the casinos glow like embers in the dark, it is easy to imagine him still thinking, still planning, still watching patterns shift across the wasteland. Not as a tyrant pacing a throne room, but as a distant presence pulling threads gently, keeping the lights steady, keeping chaos at bay. He remains a reminder that intelligence can preserve civilization, but it cannot fully escape the loneliness of standing apart from it. He is a guardian, a manipulator, a visionary, and a relic, all at once. And as the world outside slowly changes, House endures in a quiet chamber beneath it all, convinced that as long as he is there, the future can still be shaped, controlled, and guided towards something better than the ruins left behind. When the courier finally enters Robert House's orbit, everything in his long-prepared plan shifts quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. For centuries, House relied on machines, algorithms, and projections. But there were limits to what autonomous systems could do in a shattered world. Certain tasks required adaptability, improvisation, and presence beyond what any Securitron or automated directive could manage. The courier arrives as a variable he did not create, yet immediately recognizes as useful. He does not greet them with theatrics. There is no display of emotional gratitude. Instead, he speaks in measured tones, explaining objectives with clarity that feels almost clinical. He doesn't flatter. He doesn't threaten without purpose. He describes outcomes, probabilities, and the simple logic of the steps ahead. Working with House rarely feels like following orders. It feels like entering into a contract with the future, one that assumes competence and expects results. Unlike most wasteland figures who try to sway through charisma or intimidation, House leans on persuasion rooted in inevitability. He presents his argument as something already true. New Vegas will thrive under his guidance. Humanity will benefit. The courier can either participate in success or stand aside and be left behind. In his view, the world is not governed by ideology, it is governed by what works. Yet the interaction also reveals his vulnerability. He needs someone physically capable of navigating the dangerous spaces his machines cannot easily secure. Vaults left sealed, old military systems, figures who resist negotiation. For all his control, his reach is not limitless. The courier becomes the hand he never had, moving through environments where data alone cannot substitute presence. Throughout these missions, House watches closely. He evaluates reliability, decision-making, initiative. If the courier proves capable, he allows greater insight into his greater designs. If they deviate, he recalculates. The relationship is never sentimental, but it is not purely transactional either. There is a sense, buried beneath layers of calculation, that House values rare competence when he finds it. Different paths reveal different truths. A courier who aids him sees glimpses of the future he imagines. A city expanding upward, technology restored carefully, long-term research returning, and humanity gradually stepping beyond the limits imposed by catastrophe. One who challenges him witnesses another side, the fragility of a plan dependent on a single consciousness, isolated in a sealed chamber, still human enough to feel frustration when carefully built probabilities unravel. Standing in his presence, listening to the calm cadence of his synthesized voice, there is always a question hovering quietly. Is this genius shielding civilization, or is it trapping it in one man's vision forever? Fallout never resolves that question with certainty. Instead, it lets the listener rest inside the ambiguity, the way one rests under a sky that seems both open and endless, yet also full of unknown forces shaping it. Even his death, in timelines where it occurs, feels strangely intimate. Not a villain's fall, but the quiet end of a project sustained for centuries by sheer will and engineering. Without him, the strip becomes something else, sometimes brighter, sometimes messier, always less predictable. His absence proves that, despite all his planning, the world remains capable of slipping free from his grasp. But in timelines where he survives, his plan stretches forward, slow, deliberate, unyielding. New Vegas becomes a laboratory of order in a wasteland defined by improvisation. The casinos keep glowing. Trade continues. People live longer, safer lives than they might elsewhere, even if they never fully understand the mind that keeps those systems balanced behind the scenes. House represents a rare idea in Fallout's universe, that the apocalypse did not destroy ambition. It refined it into something sharper, colder, and strangely calm. He is what happens when someone refuses to let the end of the world be the end of anything. He is the persistence of design in a place where most things crumble. And as the music drifts through casino halls and Securitrons roll quietly along polished streets, he remains far below, not dreaming, not sleeping, simply calculating, waiting for humanity to grow into the future he shaped for it, convinced that patience and structure will eventually prove stronger than chaos and time. If Mr. House's rule endures, the changes across New Vegas unfold slowly, almost imperceptibly, the way desert wind shapes stone across centuries. He does not rebuild in sudden bursts or dramatic leaps forward. Instead, he stabilizes one system at a time. Water reliability improves. Medical infrastructure becomes more consistent. Trade routes are secured, not by conquest, but through careful agreements that benefit everyone involved. The strip becomes less of a gamble and more of a promise. Over time, travelers begin to think of New Vegas differently than the rest of the wasteland. It becomes a waypoint of certainty, a place where lights stay on, food is reasonably safe, and law is enforced with mechanical impartiality. Securitrons patrol steadily, neither cruel nor compassionate, simply unwavering. House believes consistency is its own kind of mercy. People may not always love the rules, but they learn to trust them. This creates a strange balance. Outside the city, life remains harsh, unpredictable, shaped by shifting factions and dangerous ruins. Inside, structure quietly replaces improvisation. Children grow up knowing their city has a logic behind it, not chaos, not tyranny, just order that feels almost mathematical. They may never see the man responsible, they may never hear his voice, but they live inside his design every single day. Research begins to reemerge. Cautiously, small laboratories reopen. Engineers study old world tools alongside Securitron schematics, learning how to maintain systems rather than simply scavenge them. House encourages this from afar, rewarding competence and discouraging reckless curiosity. He does not want brilliance that burns too quickly. He wants stability that lasts. Trade caravans learn that New Vegas will always honor its agreements. Contracts mean what they say. Payments are on time. Security escorts do not take bribes. This reliability attracts more commerce than intimidation ever could. The Strip becomes the heart of a network, a calm center surrounded by struggling regions that gradually become linked to something steadier than themselves. And yet, even as progress quietly expands, there is a tension beneath it. People wonder what lies beyond the horizon of House's plan. Will New Vegas ever truly belong to its citizens? Or will it always function as an experiment, guided by a single consciousness, preserved indefinitely and uninterested in sharing authority? Some accept that bargain willingly, others carry quiet doubts they never voice openly. House sees these murmurs not as rebellion, but as noise to be accounted for. Human dissatisfaction in his calculations is inevitable. What matters is that dissatisfaction remains manageable, guided into productive channels, entertainment, work, ambition within boundaries. He does not erase desire, he channels it through the Strip's glittering framework. Decades into the future, if all unfolds as he envisions, New Vegas becomes something rare in the wasteland, a city that feels almost pre-war in its rhythm, yet sharpened by lessons learned from catastrophe. It is not utopia. It is not free of flaws, but it is functional. Clean streets, controlled growth, quiet prosperity. People speak of it not as miracle, but as fact, as if it simply could not be any other way. And in that quiet chamber below, Mr. House remains unchanged while the world above evolves slowly. For him, time is not measured in days or even years. It is measured in trajectories, expansion curves, population models, the gradual return of complexity to a world that once lost nearly all of it. His satisfaction is subtle, almost clinical, not pride, exactly, more like confirmation that his predictions were correct. But no system, no matter how carefully designed, is ever completely insulated. Variables still arise, ambitious leaders, outside powers, unforeseen disasters, failures no model could have anticipated. House responds not with panic, but with adaptation. The plan bends, never breaking outright. His genius is not in eliminating chaos entirely, but in absorbing its impact without collapsing. For those living under his guidance, life begins to feel strangely calm compared to the wasteland beyond. Days pass, work is done, nights glow softly under neon that never flickers. Rumors circulate about the mysterious figure who keeps it all running, half legend, half fact. Some feel comforted knowing someone is always watching. Others feel unsettled, aware that the same watchfulness means they will never truly stand alone. In the end, His legacy is not defined by heroism or villainy. It is defined by continuity, the refusal to allow civilization to fade into dust without a fight. Whether that continuity is worth the cost is left to those who live inside it. And so New Vegas stands, luminous against the night, suspended between control and hope, shaped by a man who chose to outlast the world rather than abandon it. Far below, eternal machinery hums softly, carrying a single consciousness that never sleeps, still guiding, still calculating, still believing that one carefully directed city can, in time, rebuild the future piece by piece. Over time, as Mr. House's New Vegas grows more stable, the rest of the wasteland cannot help but react to it. Word spreads farther than caravans can travel. There is a city that still shines at night, a place where machines enforce rules with unwavering precision, where chaos seems to pause at the city limits like a storm unwilling to cross. Travelers who arrive bring stories back with them. Some describe opportunity, others describe surveillance, but everyone agrees on one thing: nothing else in the world quite feels like it. To people used to the unpredictability of raiders, wildlife, and brutal factions, the Strip becomes surreal. There are schedules, standards, expectations. A person who follows the rules is rarely harmed, and someone who breaks them receives swift, calculated consequences. This environment exposes something profound about humans. Many adapt quickly to order when it feels predictable. Somewhere inside them, a memory of structured life awakens, as though civilization was simply dormant rather than destroyed. But the same order also unsettles others. There is an unease in knowing that an unseen intelligence evaluates every step within the Strip, measuring behavior through cameras and automated checks. Mr. House believes such oversight is practical, efficient, protective. Those raised in the wasteland sometimes see it as claustrophobic. The city becomes a mirror reflecting deeper values, whether comfort lies in freedom or in safety. Leaders beyond New Vegas watch with mixed feelings. Some admire the stability House has created and attempt to imitate fragments of it. Others resent it, feeling that his technological superiority gives him an unfair advantage. A few quietly fear that if his model spreads, the world will be reshaped into something disciplined, sterile, and governed by machines rather than communities. House hears these concerns through intelligence networks and dismisses them gently. In his view, resistance to progress is simply another obstacle to plan around. Inside the Strip, casino bosses remain part rulers, part extensions of his design. They operate according to agreements that were written to outlast individual ambition. Even when internal conflicts break out among them, the overarching system stays intact. House built the Strip like a machine with redundant components, one that can continue functioning even when a gear fails. In that way, he tries to solve the greatest weakness he sees in human governments: dependence on fragile personalities. New generations grow up under this structure, knowing only that the city works. They never experienced collapse. Their lives contain routines, employment, entertainment, and a sense that the future extends beyond tomorrow. For them, House is more concept than person, a distant figure who ensures continuity like weather patterns or gravity, something always there, rarely questioned directly. Yet every so often, someone wonders aloud what might happen if the machinery stopped humming. If, one day, the chamber beneath the Strip fell silent, that question reveals the core paradox of his rule. A civilization built to last forever still rests on one consciousness sealed far below ground. House believes systems can outlive him, but the truth remains uncertain. No one knows whether his city has truly become independent or whether it still leans silently on the mind that dreamed it. Outside the strip, wanderers look toward the bright skyline with mixed emotions. Some see invitation, some see warning, and some simply see a reminder that the world did not end evenly, that one place managed to catch the falling pieces and hold them steady while others scattered. House never boasts about this triumph. He observes, he calculates. His pride exists quietly, tucked inside probabilities and performance charts. He understands that victory in a world like this is never loud. It is measured in the absence of disaster, the continuation of life, the fact that tomorrow looks almost like today. And still, he remains alone in many ways. Even as his city thrives, he cannot walk its streets. He cannot stand beneath the neon glow he preserved or hear the laughter fading from casino doors as night deepens. He experiences New Vegas through monitors and metrics, knowing everything yet touching nothing. His success builds around him while he remains anchored to the one choice that defined him: survival without presence. In a strange way, that makes the city itself his final companion. It reflects his thoughts, his discipline, his caution. It grows exactly as he intended, carefully, deliberately, under constant supervision. Whether that is a gift to the future or a cage disguised as progress is a question that lingers quietly, never fully answered. And far beneath the strip, as systems cycle and screens glow in the dimness, Robert House continues to watch the world unfold, believing that as long as he remains, civilization still has a guardian, one who will never sleep, never retire, and never surrender to the chaos that once tried to erase everything. If the decades stretch into centuries and Mr. House's machines continue to function, the world begins to measure time differently around New Vegas. Other settlements rise and fall, swallowed by drought, raiders, or their own internal conflicts. But the strip remains constant, glowing like a fixed point on a map that refuses to blur. Travelers come to believe that as long as those lights burn, civilization itself still has a pulse, not restored fully, not transformed entirely, but refusing to die. Children born long after the bombs no longer think of the apocalypse as a singular event. To them, it is simply the beginning of history, the first chapter in a world that has always been like this. When they hear stories of the old world, crowded streets, towering cities, oceans full of ships, the tales sound mythical, almost exaggerated. Yet when they look at New Vegas, they sense a bridge between legends and reality. Machines still work, deals still hold, structure exists, sustained by an unseen intelligence they learn to accept as both protective and distant. Mr. House, observing from his chamber, becomes something like a living historian. His records stretch unbroken from before the war, across centuries of silence, into this ongoing period of reconstruction. Where others guess, he remembers. Where communities rely on fading stories, he has precise logs, financial records, projections, and models showing how every decision shaped the present moment. Memory, for him, is not symbolic. It is measurable. Every outcome has context. He never romanticizes the past. In his mind, the pre-war world failed because it refused to plan beyond its immediate desires. Nations argued, corporations competed, and technological power expanded faster than wisdom. To him, nuclear fire was not tragedy alone, it was consequence, and that belief shapes how he governs. He does not trust sentiment, nostalgia, or majority rule. He trusts long-term equations: population stability, food supply, energy distribution, security balance, technological recovery. If those remain intact, He believes humanity has a future worth moving toward. But the longer he remains, the more profound the question becomes. What does a society look like when guided by one mind for generations? Some humans thrive under continuity. They plan careers, build families, and contribute to a system they know will not collapse overnight. Others quietly wonder what innovation means when all final decisions filter through a single consciousness. Creativity exists, but always within guardrails. Bold experiments are examined clinically before being allowed to unfold. There is a gentleness to this structure that may surprise outsiders. House rarely enforces through spectacle. Instead, he nudges, he corrects, he redirects resources, he removes the incentives that lead to chaos before chaos can take root. In a world where brutality is often the default method of control, his calm, methodical approach feels almost peaceful. And yet, woven into that peace is an awareness that choice has boundaries as invisible and absolute as the radiation zones that still mark the desert. Over time, scholars within the city, few in number but quietly influential, begin to debate what Mr. House truly represents. Some describe him as the logical next step in governance, leadership detached from ego and corruption, focused purely on outcomes. Others see him as a reminder that power, once centralized, rarely loosens its grip. They argue carefully, knowing their discussions might reach his monitors, though he rarely intervenes in philosophical disputes. Ideas, he believes, cannot destabilize a city unless they turn into movements. And movements require discontent, something he steadily minimizes. By the third or fourth generation born under his rule, his existence becomes wrapped in myth. People whisper different versions of his story. In some tellings, he saved the city single-handedly, intercepting missiles through genius alone. In others, he is portrayed as half machine, half ghost, a figure too stubborn to die. Very few ever see the reality. A fragile body supported by tubes and machinery, surrounded by subdued lighting and endless data projections, sustained not by magic, but by self-discipline and relentless planning. The irony is that as he becomes more legendary to the outside world, his internal world grows smaller. His attention narrows to streams of numbers, infrastructure reports, trade negotiations, and long-term projections that stretch centuries into the future. He removes more and more emotional interpretation from his thinking, not because he lacks feeling, but because he has learned that indulging it can cloud strategy. The man becomes method, and the method becomes city. Still, he allows himself rare, quiet reflections. Moments when he observes old skyline photographs from before the war and notes how different the strip once looked, chaotic, gaudy, and improvisational. He does not long for it, but he studies it, understanding that human desire for excess never disappears. It must be shaped, not suppressed. That insight forms the philosophical foundation of his casinos. People are allowed to gamble, celebrate, indulge, and lose. But the system around them remains steady, absorbing risk instead of collapsing beneath it. In his mind, Las Vegas becomes not a distraction from reality, but a controlled outlet for it. Beyond the region, power structures shift. Some nations grow, others fragment again. Factions watch New Vegas with caution. They see a city that never fully joins alliances and never fully isolates itself. House participates when participation benefits him, and withdraws when commitments threaten autonomy. This neutrality is strategic. By refusing to become anyone's territory, New Vegas becomes everyone's destination, a crossroads, not a capital. And yet, there is one truth House cannot predict perfectly: how memory shapes judgment over time. In the far future, people who never lived through the chaos of the wasteland may begin to question why one man continues to guide them. They may see order not as blessing, but as limitation. House understands this intellectually. He includes it in models. But models cannot fully capture emotion passed from parent to child, the way longing for independence grows quietly, like roots beneath pavement. If such tension rises, his response will not be rage or panic. It will be another calculation. He may loosen certain controls, introduce controlled elections in symbolic positions, allow greater expression in art and public space, not because he believes in those systems naturally, but because he understands that perception often shapes stability as much as policy does. In his mind, peace is something constantly adjusted, tuned like an instrument. Centuries later, if his systems continue, if his chamber endures, if no sabotage or failure breaks the chain, history might look back and see New Vegas as the seed from which organized civilization slowly grows again. Trade radiates outward. Infrastructure projects spread cautiously to surrounding states. Education returns not in bursts, but in steady, reliable increments. The world does not leap into a golden age. It simply becomes survivable, then livable, then quietly hopeful. And somewhere beneath all of that, House remains. Not celebrated publicly, not escorted through the streets on banners or statues, just present. The quiet architect who refused to let entropy have the final word. He does not require gratitude. He does not require admiration. In truth, he expects neither. What he values is continuation, the knowledge that his guiding hand prevented collapse long enough for humanity to regain footing. But even as he maintains this vision, the philosophical question he unintentionally leaves for future generations is profound. Is a carefully managed world still free? And does freedom matter if people live longer, safer, and more securely without it? Some will answer yes. Some will answer no. The debate itself may become the foundation of future political thought, a conversation about control and survival shaped by one city that refused to disappear. To lie half asleep listening to his story is to drift between admiration and unease. He is brilliant and cold, necessary and isolating, protective and unyielding. His greatness lies not in grand gestures, but in relentless patience. His flaw lies in believing that human unpredictability is a problem to solve rather than a force that sometimes creates beauty. In the end, whether he is remembered as savior, tyrant, guardian, or experiment depends entirely on who writes the final chapter. And as long as he continues breathing through machines, continuing to calculate gently in the dim glow underground, Mr. House intends to ensure that chapter is written very, very slowly, over centuries instead of years, until the world is stable enough that chaos can no longer rewrite everything overnight. Above him, the strip glows against the night, steady, unblinking. Music drifts through warm casino air. Deals are made, lives unfold, and the city endures, a monument not to luck, but to a single mind that chose to outlast the end of the world, guiding humanity forward, one quiet, measured decision at a time. In some futures, the machinery that sustains Mr. House eventually falters. Not dramatically, not with explosions or alarms. Instead, it happens the way brittle metal finally gives way after years of quiet tension, a slow failure that begins somewhere deep in the system where redundancy does not exist. A power fluctuation, a missed calibration, a part that can no longer be manufactured. For a moment, nothing seems different. Then, almost imperceptibly, the city changes. The monitors in his chamber flicker. Diagnostic lines halt mid-scroll. A humming motor strains and loses rhythm. And for the first time in centuries, the mind that has watched, calculated, and predicted falters. There is no one in the room to witness it, no audience, no confrontation, just the quiet surrender of a body that has been asked to persist far beyond what it was designed to endure. Above ground, New Vegas does not collapse immediately. The Strip continues to function. Securitrons follow their last stable directives. Casinos operate according to existing policies. The city wakes, trades, laughs, gambles, rests. Order still holds, at least for a while, because so much had already been automated. In this strange interim, New Vegas feels almost haunted, guided by rules with no living presence behind them, like a clock still running after its maker has faded. Eventually, though, the absence becomes noticeable. Certain systems require approval that never comes. Requests stall. Infrastructure repairs take longer. Minor disputes, once resolved quietly by remote intervention, linger unresolved. People begin to ask questions in low voices, not accusations, just curiosity. When was the last time anyone actually heard his voice? Rumors replace answers. Some insist he is simply busy, calculating something vast. Others swear that he is dead and that the Strip hides the truth to avoid panic. A few imagine that he has transcended entirely, leaving his machines to run the world while he watches from somewhere beyond comprehension. In the absence of certainty, legend fills the silence effortlessly. Meanwhile, the city adapts. Humans step into spaces previously occupied by invisible directives. Casino bosses negotiate more among themselves. Engineers learn to imitate systems once controlled centrally. Civic habits, long shaped by stability, do not vanish overnight. People still show up to work. Deals still matter. Trust remains, fragile but real. What emerges is not chaos, and not full freedom either. It is something transitional, as though the city is learning to balance on its own legs after years of being carried. Some residents feel sudden excitement at the idea of self-determination. Others feel a quiet anxiety, aware that stability now depends on judgment rather than certainty. The Strip's glow takes on a new meaning, not a symbol of one man's control, but a test of whether order can survive without him. Historians in later decades debate that period endlessly. Some claim House's unseen guidance planted enough structure that New Vegas grew strong instead of cracking. Others argue the city's eventual struggles reveal how deeply everything depended on him. Neither side fully knows, because by then, records have blurred, files go missing, pieces of the truth scatter. Deep underground, the chamber where House once directed the city becomes a relic. Dust gathers slowly on metal floors. The air grows still. Machines, once alive with purpose, fall into silence. Perhaps one day, explorers descend into those tunnels, guided by maps that outlived their creators. They open a sealed door, expecting treasure or monsters, and instead find a chair, a fragile frame of a man, and machines that tried, for longer than anyone else, to hold civilization together. Standing there, in the dim light, they might feel something unexpected. Not fear, not awe, but a gentle sense of melancholy. A recognition that the world above them, still functioning, still surviving, was shaped profoundly by someone who never walked its streets, never shared its celebrations, and never escaped the loneliness of his own design. New Vegas continues forward in many possible ways after that point. Sometimes it becomes a free city, run collectively by those who inherited its structure. Sometimes it fractures into competing factions who try and fail to recreate the precision House maintained. And sometimes, against all odds, it stabilizes again, not because of a single guiding mind, but because enough people decide they would rather maintain than destroy what remains. In every version, his presence lingers quietly. Policies he wrote still influence trade. Buildings he saved still stand. Systems he designed continue functioning longer than anyone expects. Even those who question his methods cannot escape the truth that without him, the city would likely have vanished into the same dust that swallowed so many others. And so, long after his voice falls silent, New Vegas becomes something like a living question. Is it better to have been guided too tightly or never guided at all? Generations reflect without fully answering. They live inside the results instead of the theories. They raise families, build businesses, argue, laugh, and occasionally glance toward the Strip's constant glow at night, wondering what it once felt like to know that somewhere beneath the ground, a single mind was always watching the horizon. Far away, travelers still tell stories about the man who predicted the war, preserved a city, and then vanished into machines. Some portray him as savior, some as tyrant, some as a tragic figure who sacrificed everything that made him human so that others could continue being human in his place. As time stretches onward, those stories become softer, blurred by distance, the way old photographs fade but never quite disappear. In that gentle ambiguity lies the true shape of his legacy, not a monument, not a legend carved into stone, just a city that refuses to fall, and a memory that drifts through it like quiet wind, reminding people that sometimes survival is shaped by choices no one else was willing to make. The Strip remains. The world changes around it. And somewhere in the fragile continuity of neon and order, the echo of Robert House's intent still guides small decisions, long after the man himself has become another part of history. In the years after Robert House's influence fades into history, whether through malfunction, overthrow, or simple time, New Vegas becomes a place where people quietly debate his legacy without ever fully resolving it. Not in loud political halls or dramatic speeches, but around dinner tables, in quiet bars, in side conversations on caravan routes. The question is never framed simply as whether he was good or bad. It is always subtler than that. Some argue that the city would not exist at all without him. They point toward the skyline, toward the functioning generators, toward the old world structures still standing. They say that when countless other settlements vanished, New Vegas endured because someone refused to leave its fate to accident. In this telling, House becomes almost heroic, not because he was kind, but because he was relentless. Others reply that survival alone is not enough. They remind people that under House, choices were limited, voices controlled, futures guided by one mind instead of many. They describe the strange quiet that hung over the Strip, stability that felt safe, and yet slightly narrowing. They ask whether people truly lived freely or whether they just lived smoothly. Neither side ever quite convinces the other because both carry truths. House preserved the city, he also controlled it deeply. The difficulty lies in weighing those realities against one another in a world where collapse was always an option. Scholars who study his rule often find themselves drifting into philosophy more than history. They see House as the embodiment of a tension older than any city, whether society thrives more under direction or under experimentation. House believed without hesitation that direction was necessary. His critics insist that experimentation, even when painful, is what keeps humanity alive. The debate becomes less about him personally and more about what civilization should look like when rebuilding from nothing. Interestingly, many who lived under his rule remember it with a sense of quiet security. They recall reliable water, predictable law, neon that never flickered. Even those who disliked his distance sometimes admit that life felt less fragile then. This does not erase their frustration, but it complicates it. House becomes, in memory, neither oppressor nor savior. He becomes something like an anchor, heavy, immovable, necessary, and at times burdensome. Over time, storytellers begin shaping his image into parable. To some travelers, he becomes the warning about what happens when one person has too much control. To others, he is the lesson that vision can outlast disaster if someone is stubborn enough. Children grow up hearing different versions depending on who tells the story. By the time they are adults, the real man beneath the strip has become a figure half real, half symbol. And somewhere in that shifting memory lies the truth Fallout often returns to. History never stays clean. Every great leader leaves questions behind that cannot be answered by statistics alone. Feelings become part of the record. Regret and gratitude exist side by side. The people of New Vegas inherit both. Even centuries later, when scholars dig through fragments of Robco archives or come across preserved security footage of the chamber where House once lived, they do not find final resolution. They find a man fiercely dedicated to order, willing to sacrifice connection for control, convinced he was saving not just a city, but civilization itself. They see brilliance, they also see isolation. Standing before those images, viewers sometimes feel a quiet sadness, not for the city, which survived, but for the man who never truly lived inside the world he protected. He built a place where others could walk, talk, laugh, gamble, argue, love, and then he remained forever apart from it, as if watching humanity through glass. In the end, history does what it always does. It turns his life into a question rather than a verdict. Was he necessary? Was he dangerous? Was he simply the product of a world that forced impossible choices on anyone who hoped to rebuild it? No one answer replaces the others. Instead, they layer together, just like the lights of New Vegas at night, each glow separate, all part of the same horizon. And the city continues, holding the echoes of his decisions the way stone holds heat after sunset, long after the source is gone. There are futures in which the courier chooses differently, and those choices ripple outward in ways few people fully understand at first. In one path, House remains in control, the strip continuing under his precise vision. In another, the courier removes him, either by force or by conviction, that the world deserves something less rigid. What's striking is how neither decision ends cleanly. Each leaves behind a mixture of stability, risk, and unanswered questions. If the courier supports him, House adapts quickly. The strip becomes sharper, more efficient. His systems expand just enough to reinforce security and trade. He sees the courier not as a servant, but as an unusually capable instrument, someone who understands consequences the way he does. Yet even in that partnership, there is distance. The courier remains mortal. House remains anchored to machinery below ground. Their alliance feels less like friendship and more like two strategic minds facing the same horizon. People who live through that version of history describe a city that grows confident, not joyful, necessarily, but secure. Raiders avoid it. Factions approach carefully. Outsiders learn that New Vegas is not a place to conquer, but a place whose survival has been engineered beyond ordinary ambition. House speaks occasionally, calmly, with the tone of someone who already knows the ending. Whether he's right or wrong, he never wavers. In the other timelines, where the courier dismantles his control, the feeling across the strip shifts more dramatically. The change is not violent for everyone, but it is disorienting. For the first time, Residents realize the rules they've lived under were not eternal. They can be rewritten. Power becomes human again, for better and worse. Leaders argue. Votes matter in some places, force in others. Mistakes happen openly instead of quietly corrected by unseen oversight. The courier, intentionally or not, becomes part of that new mythology. People tell stories about the one who freed the city, or doomed it, or simply altered its direction without understanding what would follow. In those versions, New Vegas sometimes becomes more alive. It also becomes more fragile. Progress feels improvised, built on personalities rather than precise design. The city has a pulse, but that pulse can race or falter depending on who holds authority at any given moment. What never changes across any timeline is the imprint House leaves behind. Vault doors close and open. Governments rise and crumble. But the Strip remains a reminder that one person once looked at the end of the world and refused to accept it as final. Even those who disliked his control cannot ignore that stubborn refusal. It becomes part of the city's identity. Survival as an intentional act, not a fortunate accident. Sometimes, wanderers passing through at night stand along the edge of the Strip and watch the neon shimmer. They don't know every detail about the man who kept those lights alive. They don't need to. What they feel is something rare in the wasteland: continuity. A sense that the world did not completely restart from nothing, that somewhere, beneath history's collapse, a thread remained unbroken. And there is something strangely comforting in that thought. Not comfort rooted in love for Mr. House himself, but in the idea that planning, foresight, and patience still mattered, even after everything fell apart. It suggests that humanity did not lose every part of itself when the bombs fell, only most of the parts that forgot how to think further than tomorrow. For listeners drifting near sleep, his story becomes less about ideology and more about contrast. A human mind wrapped in machines, a city alive above a man who could not walk through it. A future designed carefully, yet always vulnerable to human choice. It invites a softer realization that survival in Fallout is rarely clean, rarely morally pure, and almost never the result of heroic certainty alone. It comes from compromise, calculation, intuition, and sacrifice woven together in fragile ways. In the quiet hours, when the casinos empty a little and the desert cools, it's easy to imagine the Strip breathing, lights pulsing like a heartbeat, music echoing faintly through open doors, footsteps fading along polished floors. Above ground, life continues in its measured rhythm. Below, in memory or reality depending on the timeline, rests the man who made that rhythm possible, whether by guiding it or by inspiring those who came after him to protect it differently. His story doesn't resolve with triumph or failure. It settles into something gentler, a reminder that vision can preserve what chaos would otherwise erase, and that every future built from ruin carries the imprint of those who refused to surrender when surrender would have been simpler. New Vegas stands because someone imagined it standing, and long after imagination hardens into infrastructure, that lingering intention remains part of the air, woven into every flicker of neon, every roll of dice, every quiet walk across the Strip at midnight beneath a sky that has seen worlds end and still, somehow, holds a city that refuses to fade. Time behaves differently around Robert House. For most people, time is measured in immediate concerns: today's food, tomorrow's risk, next week's uncertainty. But House has lived so long beyond ordinary lifespan that time stretches out in front of him like a long, illuminated corridor. He does not think in seasons or years. He thinks in trajectories. His mind maps decades the way others map days, seeing patterns gradually resolving into outcomes that only patience can reveal. This perspective makes him feel almost alien, even though he is deeply human underneath it all. He remembers the pre-war world not as nostalgia, but as a sequence of mistakes: the escalating arms race, the energy crisis, governments bound by short-term politics instead of long-term planning, corporations cutting corners because quarterly reports mattered more than planetary survival. To House, the bombs did not fall suddenly. They arrived with inevitability. He watched the signs accumulate like storm clouds, while others debated whether or not it was really going to rain. That memory shapes how he governs. Where others build systems that require constant emotional input, rallies, promises, speeches, he builds structures that function whether people approve or not. He believes good systems should not need to be defended endlessly. They should simply work. And if they work long enough, people stop questioning them because questioning becomes unnecessary. New Vegas becomes less about loyalty to him and more about familiarity with stability. Stability, he assumes, eventually becomes love in its own quiet way. Yet beneath that logic lies something unspoken. House does not entirely trust humanity to learn from catastrophe. He respects human intelligence, ingenuity, innovation, but not human restraint. His life support chamber is, in some sense, a physical symbol of that belief. He removed himself from the flow of ordinary life because he believed that attachment, ego, and emotion could sway leaders off course. From inside his sealed environment, he can maintain clarity, but at the cost of warmth. Inside that chamber, time has turned inward. He is surrounded by constant data streams, projections, health monitors, system diagnostics, trade numbers, security feeds. His world is not silent, but it is narrow. There are no scents, no tactile sensations beyond the sterile presence of medical apparatus, no accidental moments of laughter drifting in. His reality is made up of screens and controlled temperature, measured breaths, and the gentle murmur of machinery keeping him suspended just above death. This existence creates a peculiar paradox. He is one of the most powerful people in the world, and yet one of the most physically limited. He can influence armies with a command, but cannot step outside. He can alter the future of regions, but cannot change his seat. The world moves because he thinks, yet he cannot move through it. Only rarely does he allow himself to contemplate that imbalance. When he does, he frames it not as tragedy, but as necessary trade-off. Progress demands sacrifice. Civilization demands guardians willing to give up comfort so others can retain it. But human minds are not immune to isolation, even ones as disciplined as his. At times, he studies old video footage of New Vegas before the war, neon reflecting off crowded sidewalks, laughter rolling out of casinos, music pulsing into the night. He analyzes patterns in those recordings, the way a scientist would analyze an extinct species, how people behaved when danger felt distant, how crowds moved when the future seemed endless. He never claims to miss it, yet he returns to those recordings more often than he admits. They are not entertainment. They are reminders of what humanity becomes when structure, safety, and prosperity align, the condition he wants to recreate without the arrogance that destroyed it. He also occasionally studies files on individuals who live within his city, not for surveillance alone, but out of quiet curiosity. A gambler who lost everything and rebuilt their life slowly. A doctor who chose to stay on the strip because it offered reliable power for equipment. A shopkeeper who grew from impoverished scavenger to respected merchant under predictable trade routes. These small stories affirm something for him, not emotionally, but logically, that order provides opportunity for ordinary lives to grow. He sees human resilience as valuable, but he does not like leaving it unstructured. Unstructured resilience, to him, leads eventually to exploitation, violence, and collapse. So he shapes it gently, creating lanes for ambition to travel through without crashing. Casinos, businesses, contracts, regulations, all carefully designed not to stifle, but to contain. Outside, the desert continues its endless cycle. Days burn, nights cool, dust drifts across broken highways, radiation lingers in abandoned craters. From House's vantage point, the land becomes a slow-moving equation. He studies how weather patterns carry contaminants, how migratory paths shift, how small settlements rise in pockets of relative safety, then vanish when pressures grow too great. The desert teaches him patience. It also reinforces his belief that survival without planning is almost always temporary. His intelligence network extends quietly across regions, caravans, informants, disguised transmission relays. Information flows toward his chamber like rivers feeding into a reservoir. He never reacts impulsively. Every piece of information becomes part of a larger tapestry, evaluated against long-term projection models. Sometimes his best decision is to do nothing at all, to watch as minor conflicts resolve themselves naturally. Intervention, he understands, can create as much instability as neglect. This restraint confuses people who expect tyrants to be constantly heavy-handed. House rarely crushes opposition outright. He instead makes opposition unprofitable. He restricts certain trade pathways, offers incentives elsewhere, shifts casino policies, nudges social currents until the wave of resistance loses energy. To observers, it feels smooth. To him, it is just system tuning. Still, there are moments when he must act decisively, a faction pushing too aggressively toward the Strip, an internal conspiracy that forgets who truly holds authority, a threat that, if left unchecked, could unravel decades of careful engineering. When those moments arise, House does not hesitate. He is not cruel, but he is absolute. He treats threats the way a surgeon treats infection, not emotionally, but with precision and finality. He knows hesitation creates instability, and instability is the enemy of survival. And yet, his mind is not pure machine. He still experiences pride when a difficult projection holds true, satisfaction when a long-term gamble pays off exactly as calculated, a faint echo of something like gratitude when someone proves unexpectedly competent. He does not suppress those impulses. He simply refuses to let them lead. They exist in the background like faint music behind strategy. There is also fear, though he rarely acknowledges it. Not the fear of death itself, that is simply an endpoint in probability models, but the fear of failure, the fear that everything he preserved might, under some unanticipated chain of events, unravel faster than he can adjust. He knows that the fate of civilizations can hang on single misjudgments. History is full of them. His fear is quiet, disciplined, and deeply buried, but it exists as a constant pressure, urging him to monitor, refine, predict, and never grow complacent. He sometimes imagines the far future, centuries beyond his own survival, when the systems he built outgrow any need for him. Children studying textbooks that talk about the Great War as distant myth, cities connected again by reliable transportation, trade networks that no longer depend on fragile caravans, scientists rediscovering old principles and extending them carefully, not recklessly. He does not need statues. He does not need credit. He only wants the arc of history to bend away from collapse. Yet even as he imagines that, another thought surfaces, one he rarely voices. What if humanity, given freedom again, repeats the same mistakes? What if the next era of abundance births the same arrogance, the same geopolitical rivalries, the same disregard for limits? It is this question that hardens his resolve. He believes structure must remain firm long after recovery begins, or else recovery simply becomes the prelude to another disaster. Outside narratives often portray him as emotionless simply because he speaks calmly. But beneath his restraint is a deep seriousness about consequences. Others gamble with ideologies. He gambles only with probabilities, and even then, only when odds can be shaped. He never refers to himself as ruler internally. He sees himself as custodian, not of power, but of trajectory. The city does not exist for him. It exists for what it might become. His own life has already narrowed into a single purpose: ensure continuity long enough that civilization can truly re-establish itself with wisdom rather than desperation. And so his days, which might look repetitive from the outside, are filled with subtle shifts, adjusting trade policies 1%, rebalancing strip security coverage, funding a small research group that may take 20 years to produce one meaningful advancement, denying another group access to dangerous technology until safeguards mature. Every decision is small. Every decision is deliberate. Over time, the accumulation becomes enormous. Meanwhile, the people who live within New Vegas feel none of this calculation directly. They live their lives, falling in love, arguing over debts, laughing at casino tables, working shifts, raising children, sleeping under neon glow. To them, the city simply works. They seldom think about the invisible scaffolding that holds everything in place, and in a strange, quiet way, that is exactly the point. When governance is functioning at its best, it stops feeling noticeable. At night, when the strip hums gently and the desert stretches out in darkness beyond its lights, the chamber beneath remains softly lit. Monitors shift through endless data sequences, systems recalibrate, protocols update, house watches, not out of obsession, but out of duty. The world has already proven what happens when vigilance lapses. He does not dream. Sleep is too dangerous in his condition, too carefully managed. But if he could dream, perhaps he might see a world where he walks through his city at least once, not as a symbol, not as a ruler, just as an ordinary man among people who survived because of choices he made decades earlier. The irony, of course, is that for that dream to exist, he had to give up the possibility of ever experiencing it. Over time, one realization becomes clear. House is not merely a character within Fallout. He represents a question the series asks repeatedly: whether humanity needs guardians who think beyond the limits of ordinary life, and whether those guardians inevitably lose something vital in the process. And as listeners drift into sleep hearing his story, they rest inside that tension, understanding that neither side of the question feels fully comfortable, and that maybe that discomfort is part of what makes the world believable at all. From his chamber beneath the strip, Robert House studies factions the way a scientist observes ecosystems. He does not hate them. He does not romanticize them. He simply watches how they function, how they organize power, how they either collapse or persist. Each one becomes a case study in governance, proof, in his mind, of why his approach is necessary. The new California Republic fascinates him most. In many ways, the NCR represents the closest attempt the post-war world has made to rebuild civilization in the familiar shape of the old courts. Elections, army, infrastructure, tax systems that strain under ambition, debates that stall while problems multiply. When House examines NCR reports, he sees patterns he recognizes from before the war, the same bureaucratic inertia, the same slow drift between idealism and corruption. He does not despise them. Instead, he regards them as tragically predictable. A government built on compromise will always move slower than crises do. Votes require time. Committees require arguments. And by the time consensus forms, the landscape has already changed. House believes the NCR genuinely wants stability, but he also believes their system is designed to chase it rather than hold it. To him, the nation is a machine with too many hands on the controls, constantly correcting itself and never quite arriving. He often notes that the NCR spreads not because it is brilliant, but because it is familiar. People remember pre-war governments. They trust structures that resemble what their grandparents once described. But memory is not the same as wisdom, and House quietly concludes that if the NCR ever grows too large, its contradictions will eventually collapse inward, consuming itself in administrative weight. Caesar's Legion, by contrast, represents the opposite extreme. Where the NCR governs through paperwork and votes, the Legion governs through will, one voice, absolute and unchallenged. Discipline replaces debate. Order emerges instantly, enforced brutally, unquestioned. House does not underestimate the efficiency of such a structure. He acknowledges, almost clinically, that fear can create stability quickly. Armies move when commanded. Settlements obey. Roads stay safe because no one dares disrupt them. But he also recognizes that systems built entirely around a single figure's dominance cannot outlast the figure himself. When Caesar dies, the Legion becomes an argument, officers grasping at interpretation, fragments of doctrine held together by violence instead of coherent strategy. It is not a civilization. It is a personality cult stretched into the shape of one. And personalities, House reminds himself, are temporary. No matter how strong, no matter how ruthless, they remain bound by mortality in ways his own existence has deliberately escaped. He sees tribal societies throughout the wastes much the same way. They are adaptable, flexible, capable of surviving in harsh environments by remaining decentralized, but they lack long-term vision. Each generation responds to its own challenges without building infrastructure that can endure beyond memory. Traditions shift. Leadership changes, lessons are forgotten. Their strength is resilience, but their weakness is trajectory. They drift wherever conditions push them. Vault communities intrigue him differently. Some preserve knowledge, others deteriorate it into experiments gone wrong. House finds the irony almost poetic, humanity attempting to save itself through sealed underground sanctuaries, only to reopen into worlds as fractured as the ones they tried to avoid. Vaults prove to him that protection alone is insufficient. Without external planning, without direction once the doors open, survivors scatter into the same uncertainty as everyone else. Brotherhood of Steel outposts pass across his monitors like relics from a different age entirely. To House, they are curators of the past, obsessed with technology, terrified of sharing it. He respects their discipline, but dismisses their philosophy. Hoarding knowledge ensures stagnation. Civilization cannot move forward if its tools remain locked behind doctrinal gates. The Brotherhood guards a museum while the world around it tries, haltingly, to rebuild. House considers that posture noble, but ultimately misaligned with survival. He measures raider bands, slaver groups, and minor warlords with even colder detachment. These represent what happens when power is unstructured. Bursts of brutality that burn bright and then extinguish themselves in conflict. They leave scars, but not legacies. No records, no systems. They shape nothing except temporary fear, and to House, fear without architecture is meaningless. It vanishes the moment stronger forces move through. Every time he finishes evaluating one of these factions, his conclusion returns to the same point. Humanity requires leadership that neither dilutes itself into bureaucratic paralysis nor compresses itself into personal tyranny. It requires continuity without worship, authority without ego, systems that endure not because people believe in them, but because they function. He places himself precisely in that imagined center. People accuse him, at times, of arrogance, and he does not deny it. He believes he is likely the most capable living architect of technological civilization. He believes his education, experience, and foresight surpass any elected official or warlord, and he believes responsibility follows ability. If one is uniquely capable of steering history away from collapse, then refusing to do so becomes, to him, a moral failure. Still, he understands optics. He knows people resist what they do not choose. That is why his city does not feel like a dictatorship on its surface. He keeps visible structures intact. Businesses owned by families, casinos with their own management styles, traders free to negotiate. He avoids unnecessary displays of centralized rule because he knows that power does not need spectacle to exist. It needs results. In this way, his version of governance becomes almost invisible. Laws are rarely preached. They are simply enforced calmly. People internalize boundaries the way travelers internalize borders on old maps. Over time, they begin to mistake those boundaries for natural reality, and that phenomenon, society quietly adopting limits as second nature, is something House counts on. But every philosophy has blind spots, even those refined by centuries of observation. His is rooted in control, and control requires predictability. Unpredictability, however, is often where humanity's most extraordinary breakthroughs appear. Accidental discoveries, cultural revolutions, art that shifts perspective in ways statistics never anticipated. House is aware of this, yet uneasy about it. He nurtures creativity carefully, encouraging innovation only when it can be contained safely. He refuses to gamble on brilliance that might destabilize the foundation he built. To those who value freedom above structure, this feels suffocating. To those who value survival above risk, it feels comforting. The tension is never fully resolved. It is lived day by day. Beyond philosophy, there are quieter observations he keeps to himself. How people walk differently when they feel safe. How laughter in casinos changes pitch when individuals trust the future. How markets stabilize when citizens know tomorrow is unlikely to collapse overnight. These micro-behaviors affirm his belief. Order transforms human psychology. Chaos shrinks imagination. Stability allows it to breathe again. He does not want New Vegas to become the entire world. He wants it to become a template. In his grandest long-range projections, he imagines regions adopting his methods voluntarily once they see the benefits, not through conquest, but through emulation. Structured trade, controlled infrastructure, automated enforcement, leaders learning to think in centuries rather than campaigns. And if humanity finally reaches beyond Earth one day, he imagines colonies designed according to those principles from their inception, ordered, self-correcting, resistant to the political storms that crippled the old world. In these visions, he does not appear as a symbolic founder. He appears as an unseen equation written into the foundations of civilization itself. The world may forget his name, but it will continue to operate on systems he once pioneered. That, to him, is the highest form of immortality. Still, even he cannot escape the awareness that all systems face entropy. Parts wear down, human ambition resurfaces in unpredictable shapes, external threats evolve. He builds redundancy upon redundancy, but he knows perfection is impossible. What he seeks instead is resilience, the ability for New Vegas to bend without shattering, to recover faster than failure spreads. Sometimes, he sits in quiet reflection, not on power, but on fragility. How close the world once came to becoming nothing but scattered ruins forever. How thin the thread of survival remains, even now. That understanding keeps him grounded in a way many mistake for emotional detachment. In truth, his calm springs from fear that has been disciplined into vigilance. He rarely voices gratitude, but he feels a muted version of it toward the people who live under his system. Not gratitude for loyalty, but gratitude for participation. Civilization only works when millions of daily decisions align, even subconsciously. People who follow rules, build businesses, maintain routines, raise children, and contribute quietly are, to him, the real foundation of progress. He simply ensures those contributions occur within a safe framework. If anyone ever asked him whether he loves New Vegas, he would likely pause. Love suggests attachment deeper than logic, but if pressed, he might answer that he respects it. He respects what it represents, proof that civilization is not fragile by design, only fragile when guided poorly. In the stillness of night, the strip gleams like a line drawn across darkness, separating the chaos of the wasteland from the controlled glow of possibility. Patrol drones roll, slot machines murmur, air systems hum steadily. The city feels alive, not because of chance, but because every piece has been placed intentionally. And beneath it all, Robert House remains, steady, analytical, unwavering, a guardian not of individuals, but of trajectory, a ruler who does not campaign, yet never stops governing, a human being who chose structure over comfort, isolation over decay, permanence over sentiment, believing wholeheartedly that the world needed someone willing to make that trade. Whether history agrees is a question left to those who sleep peacefully in the light of a city that still stands because he refused to let it fall.